Thank you all for being here. I'll admit I'm a little bit nervous standing here. I've heard all sorts of associate professors being here, PDs, while my former life was as a humble data scientist at a municipality. And at the same time, I do believe I have something to share that's valuable and I hope very useful for all of you. So I'm an AI governance officer here at Alliander. And what I do is I talk about the AI Act, how as Alliander we put all the things that are in the law into practice. And I also talk about ethical questions related to AI. How do we mitigate the risks that are associated with that? And that's what I'd like to talk with you about today. So it's going to be a bit different from the presentations that you've heard until now. I hope some variety will be appreciated by you all. But I think it'll be just as relevant when the world is moving towards all sorts of different AI systems, whether it's large language models or your classical machine learning that we're all used to. I think data space could prove to be a valuable piece of the puzzle to making systems work. So, right now, my goal for this presentation is to help you prepare for that future and to talk about what the governance and the ethical side looks like for one specific application here at Alliander. So to kind of set the stage here, you've already seen this map from my fellow presentation colleague over there. The way I always think about congestion is we want to prevent these big beautiful cables like these from burning through all the way up top right here. If there's too much electricity on the cables, we're going to run into problems, so we need to do something about it. Long term, this means expanding the net. But that of course takes quite a bit of time, quite a bit of resources. So we would also need a short-term solution, being able to see in what parts of the net is, for instance, the voltage becoming too high. And how do we act upon that? So, how do we act upon that? We try to find a technological solution. So in my work, 3 questions that I always think about when it comes to a technological solution are, can we do it? This is increasingly becoming, yes, we can do it. Are we allowed to do it? Which of course relates to laws that you've heard about before. But there's also the question of, should we do it? And that's what I'm going to be talking about real soon. So let's say we take something like net congestion, what I talked about before. We need a long-term solution to figure out where in the net are we seeing problems like these. So, can we do it technically? Yes, we can. This is where short-term energy forecasts come in. So I'm not part of the development team myself, so I'm going to keep it a bit high over. Feel free to correct me if I get some details wrong, colleagues at Alliander. But high over, what the system does is this. So looking at the first graph right here, over time, you can get insight into specific parts of the net and how high the load is on the cables. And what you want to prevent is things like these happening. A peak going over the red line. That's when stuff like burning through cables is going to come in. So what you want to do is you want to find a way to prevent that. So let's say, as Alliander, you call up a hotel that you have a flex contract with. And you ask them, hey, we're seeing a peak that's going to happen in 2 days. We would like to ask you to, in 2 days, for instance, not plug in any electric cars to the electricity nets between 1 and 2. Something like that could be a mitigating factor, which would lead to the final graph at the end there, where the peak is in essence shaven off because you were on time in doing something about it. So short term, can we make a system that helps protect the net like this? Definitely. Now question 2 becomes, are we allowed to do it? So I'm not going to go into the details about the electrical law side of things, because my responsibility is specifically the AI Act. After all, Stef uses machine learning, which does mean it falls under the definition of AI from the Act. So very specifically, Stef counts as a so-called high-risk system under the AI Act. One of the lines that's there mentions that systems that are related to critical infrastructure, so AI systems intended to be used as safety components in a management and operation of critical digital infrastructure, road traffic, water, gas, heating, and electricity. Those are seen as high risk, which means you need to put some measures in place to make sure everything is all used safely. So, are we allowed to do it? Yes, if we do meet the obligations of the AI Act. So, something that I was thinking about, one of the obligation of the AI Act is to have certain data governance practices in place. And I was thinking, well, if you're offering something in terms of energy data spaces, which has some, I hope, really well done data governance practices, that could also be interesting to link to offer to people and to companies, to be like, hey, you would like to use a very useful AI system. Our energy data spaces are offered in such a way that you, for instance, abide by these AI Act obligations. Maybe something to think about, to consider in the back of your head. Other obligations include stuff like technical documentation needing to be in a specific way so that people always understand how the system works, so that incidents are either prevented or can be quickly acted upon, and a bunch of others that I won't go into detail for now because I will be here for another hour. Except for one that helps answer the final question: should we do it? And should we do it is a question that can easily become pretty big and pretty complicated, but I think it's very important to ask. So to kind of put it in a practical sense. Okay, so Stef is a high-risk AI system. We need to make something called a fundamental rights impact assessment. So what this does is essentially simply a document that forces you to ask certain questions about your system. Mainly, what values are affected by the deployment of the system. So what values are affected. And this can be a positive or a negative way because you're using this system for a good reason. So for instance, using Stef mainly is a big part of keeping the net safe, to make sure cables don't burn through. So that's a very good reason to use the system. And there's also the question of reliability of the net, making sure that people don't suddenly have their power being cut out. So short term you need something to account for that. What about things like accessibility, which kind of relates to reliability, having sure people can keep their fridge on. I'm sure all of us would prefer. Oh, responsibility also comes into place. We're a DSO, we're a net beheerder. We have a responsibility to keep people electricity, to keep the lights run. So a system like this also aids in that, along with an efficiency factor, because there could still be a little bit of room on the net that we could use for a flex contract. It could mean that one customer or company, or perhaps an apartment complex, that could still house people if we are maybe a little bit more flexible about the possibilities on the net. So there are all sorts of positive reasons to start using such a system. And what this impact assessment is to a large part about is trying to weigh those positives against some of the potential negatives that are here. So, for instance, if we're using the nets sub-optimally, we could have connected more companies, more customers, well, just people really, to the net. And in a way, that's also good for us because we're simply connecting more people. But also, if a cable burns through, we're going to have to replace it. A street is going to have to be like being put open again. That's quite a lot of time, quite a lot of work that could be done then. So let's say we start using a system like Stef too conservatively or too progressively. That could mean that certain customers that could have been a part of the net aren't, because we would have been too careful. You know, we were thinking about the peaks, and there could have been a way to perhaps put that extra company on the net. But in the other sense, if we're too lax about it, if we're like, well, maybe this one company could be added to the net, then this problem becomes a big one again. So it's another balancing act right there. Sustainability is also related to this, because if we're putting less specific, so let's say you have an apartment complex that you can put on the net again. Those could have given back solar power, but because we can't connect that apartment complex to the net anymore, we are losing solar power. Whereas if we connect, for instance, a company that doesn't run on sustainable energy, we would still be able to connect them, but it does cost us kind of a sustainability factor there. And you have these positives and negatives. You could, of course, conclude it's still worth using this system. But what these questions do is they force you to at least admit what you're really building and to be very responsible about what you do. That's why I think these questions are very important. So to finish up, in a way, because you are limiting what people have access to in terms of electricity and in what way, by for instance offering a flex contract, in a way you are kind of limiting someone's freedom to electricity because they may not always have the same electricity available. Could that still weigh up against the broader safety of the net? Yes, that's why the system is in place. And fairness could also be affected in a way. So let's say you have an employee at Alliander who can look at all this data and can make the decisions about who to put in, who to attach to the net or not. Maybe there are certain, people that this person would prefer would or would not be a part of the net. So it is a bit of a hypothetical, but you could simply put, in Dutch the vier ogen principle, the four eyes principle, having another person look at the results to potentially mitigate this risk. So, should we do it can be a pretty big question to answer, but I think it leads to some very important questions and things that we can also account for. So, should we do it? In this case, what we decided is yes, that the positive values that were affected were important enough to override the negative impact of the negatively affected values. Either that, or we simply put some mitigations in place to prevent those negative affections of values from causing too much harm. I'm personally consistently kind of amazed of what we're able to do with technology nowadays, and I think that's only going to grow. And at the same time, I think there is a responsibility that comes with this, to use all this data, to use all this technology in a responsible way. So I think it's very important to, when we're using technology, when we're using all this data, to ask, can we do it? Which is increasingly becoming yes. Are we, of course, allowed to do it? But to me, most notably, should we do it? And what my dream is that in the future, when you're all going back to your jobs, you're all doing, I hope, wonderful work, and I think you are doing a lot of wonderful work, that you can look yourself in the eye and say, should we do it? And it can be a very confident yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, if you could go around for questions, then please.
Thanks for your clear story. The question, should we do it, you will also ask if you don't use AI, probably, right? So what's the difference between that situation? So you automate something without AI, or you do it with AI? What does it differ then with this question?
I see. So your question is, should we do it change, whether you're using an AI system or no AI system? Yeah. I think that's a question that, especially in the age of large language models, is becoming pretty important. I think those are two things you can weigh against each other. So, for instance, large language models can sometimes hallucinate their results. So they can say things that aren't factually correct. That doesn't have to be a problem in every use case, but it's something absolutely could. When you really need that certainty, or you really need to be able to trace back how an AI system got to its answer. So one of the questions that we additionally ask in this impact assessment is something that we call, it's kind of a complicated term, subsidiarity, which basically means, is there another way, another system to achieve the same results? For instance, a non-AI system. So that is part of the questions that we ask, and I think it's an important one, so thanks for addressing it.
Yep.
Thank you for your presentation. It's not so much a question, but I really like the story about FRIA and being transparent about values. And I think that could strongly relate to some of the questions of the prior presenters today. How to build that trust? Well, be transparent about the FRIA you execute doing your project or data space, or even indeed let people see what consciously you decided to do or not to do. So I really am fond of the story you told. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the compliment. And I think it's also a good reminder to ask everyone that the fundamental rights impact assessment is quite the document, and yes, it's mandatory for high-risk AI, but simply asking the question, should we do it? And thinking about, okay, so how do I approach this question? Okay, well, That Menno guy from Alliander said something about values. What was that again? That could already give you a lot of tools to be able to communicate to other people. This is why we're doing it, and we're doing it for good reason. Or to critically ask, are we doing it for the right reasons? So, fully agree. Thanks.
Yeah, I was curious if, like, the urgency of the situation with net congestion changes how you answer these questions, and if they have changed throughout the past years.
Ooh, so has the urgency of the energy transition changed the way these questions are answered? So that is actually quite an interesting question. I've only been here for about a year, so I do feel like asking my colleague now what she's noticed. She's been here for about 4 years. I think the urgency factor is definitely something that comes into account here. So let's say there wasn't that much urgency when it came to the energy transition. That could change the way that these positive and negative values are related. But because the net is quite full, the safety factor becomes quite big, because there is a very real risk of net congestion becoming too big of a problem. So I would say urgency definitely affects some of the values, mainly how big of a factor they are. Does that kind of help your question?
Yeah, sort of. What I was thinking about is that if you look at that side, it's more about the community or the bigger picture, and maybe the freedom and fairness is more about the individual. And when I think about the urgency, that the impact goes towards the community, if you understand what I mean. That actually it can go at the expense of the individual, what you then decide. So that's where my question was coming from a little bit.
Ah, I see. So because there's a big urgency on a community level, that does mean that on an individual level, you'll need to, for instance, give up a bit of freedom to be able to still help the community as a whole. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that comes into play here, absolutely. The community, individual part. Yeah, thanks for the addition.
Well, this is a assessment that is in place for adopting AI solutions within Alliander regarding the AI Act. Is something similar into place for sharing data within or outside of Alliander? Or the DSOs as in general?
So is there an impact assessment specifically about data sharing within Alliander? Yeah.
Yes.
That I don't quite know. Maybe one of my colleagues from the data office could help out with this? Yeah? All right.
We definitely do a check before we bring data outside, which our legal departments are doing to make sure that the data which we bring outside is open is open for everyone. So we make a judgment, and our legal departments of the DSOs do these checks for us before we bring the data outside.
Yeah, that's whether you can and whether you
Yes.
are allowed to, but should you? Is that?
Yeah, that's mainly a bit right now.
I
That's
like this framework.
Yeah.
It should be addressed more widely
Yeah.
with other technologies and data sharing in specific.
Yeah, that's our business leaders make that discussion, the decision which data we think that our customers need, and we get a lot of questions. Can you give us the data? And you always have to make these questions. Should we do it? Could we do it? But I think the AI helps us to do this even more. So I think the ethical part of the data and how we deal with the ethical part is becoming more urgent, and so we have to get these questions in all the processes. So it's becoming more important.
I had a question about should we do it? So how broad is it? So is it purely for in this case, the staff use case? So for the machine learning thing itself, or is it broader? So in the sense like you use the staff thing, you do the analysis, and then you go to that hotel that you said, okay, you cannot charge the cars for between this period, but what happens if that hotel does it anyway? So is within the should we do it question also, are we going to enforce these kind of things or these follow-up actions that you could take as a DSM?
Yes, they are part of it, yes. So at the end of the impact assessment, you want concrete actions that you're going to take, because I love a good philosophical discussion, but we're here to make an energy transition work. What do we do? So if, for instance, we notice that it's very difficult to get, for instance, hotels to abide by the terms that we set, there would need to be a measure in place to ensure that. And if that's not possible, we really have to consider the implications of that, which relates to that question, should we do it? Well, if we can't enforce this easily, maybe not. I think in this case, because we have flex contracts in place, it is a way that we enforce it. So that wouldn't be a risk in this specific use case. It is part of the conversation, definitely.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So, what I want to ask, these are nice yes and no questions where you can say yes or no, but in the real life people are pretty biased. So they have this idea in mind, and isn't then it's the question like, how can we do it? How are we allowed to do it, and how should we do it instead of the yes or no question? Because people are already biased in making it work.
I think this is a good question. So you're saying that the way it's proposed right now, it seems like a simple yes or no. But what about the nuance? What about the people that are, for instance, incentivized to use these systems because it's their job? Is that kind of the question that you're asking? Or?
Yeah, it's more about bias. So people are always biased in solving problems. So it's not about yes or no, but more about, okay, how can we manage this? How can we do it?
Right, yeah. So in practice, it's not usually a very strict yes or no. It's often a yes if or a yes but. And that if and that but, that has to do with specific actions that you're gonna take. So let's say that we take a look at a system like Steph, and we wouldn't have a 4 eyes principle in case. And then we would ask, should we do it? Then it's like, well, it is possible to kind of abuse the system if you're not careful. So in that sense, it's not a strict yes, we should. It's yes, but we'll only sign on, give our signature if that 4 eyes principle is being taken into place. Now, when it comes to specifically bias, that's of course a very difficult thing. The way we address it is by putting very different people into the conversation. So I'm part of that conversation. There's also going to be someone who, on a business level, has kind of the business question that originates. It's like, hey, I want to stop these cables from burning through. I need a solution for this. And of course, they may be biased towards this particular solution. So then it's my job, or the question of sometimes an ethicist that we specifically have at Alliander, to ask very critical questions about that. So in a way, that is how we hope to prevent as much bias as possible, to make sure it doesn't lean too much on one way or the other. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Perhaps the last question, otherwise we go to the coffee break. Last question.
Yeah, you mentioned before about subsidiaries for AI, and I was wondering a bit, in this AI Act, the definition of AI is quite broad, right? So a lot of things fall under AI or not. Can you remind me what it was again?
Yeah, so the specific definition of AI, of the AI Act, I would have to look up. But I'm hearing a question being about, hey, sometimes it's a bit vague when something actually is AI or not. So, yes. So how we manage that is we keep close contact with our research center. I think it's above right here, and we talk about like here we really go into the technicalities of what makes something AI or not. Is there, for instance, if you put very difficult physics formulas into a programming script, does it make it AI? No, because your results are still going to be deterministic. It's still going to be the same every time you put an input in. It could still be really, really complicated, but it's not going to have the same issues that an AI system would have, where it learns purely from the data and could in that sense be a bit biased or unreliable. So we have a specific is it AI like sheet that we most of the times grab to answer that specific question. If you'd like to hear the details, we could maybe keep in touch.
Thanks, that's clear.
Thank you, Menno, for your presentation.